years from now down the road when they're out of college and they're maybe starting a family, they might not remember what they played their junior year at the spring concert, but they are just singing in the rain, walking back to their hotel or getting back on the coach. That's what they're going to remember. Those are the defining experiences I believe that will last a lifetime.
So Charlie, you were a teacher for 18 years. And then when you decided to leave teaching, you came to Peak and you saw something, I think, in travel and being a working with a tour operator that would be a natural extension of being a music educator. So, why did you pick Peak, and what do you think about the idea that with Peak and our tours that we deal with directors and building those tours for the directors?
Most travel companies sell a trip, but Peak really builds partnerships. That means that we talk to them about their program goals. That's not just a template. We want to understand where they're coming from. How long have they been there? Where do they see themselves in like a short-term, long-term goal? We understand school calendars, the testing windows, the admin pressure, the booster politics. We understand that all. We help directors look organized, prepared, and in control. And to a director, that's priceless.
For sure. And I think it's another tool for them to use. There's a lot of tools in a director's toolkit. And, for a director to have the resource of Peak to do that, I think is an essential one. So they don't have to deal with, I don't know any band director or choir director that went to school to be a tour operator. I don't know of any of them that decided they wanted to figure out hotels and all of that. It was much more about theory and music and, classroom management and rehearsal techniques and, teaching students through music. So I think that's incredibly important. So it's really cool. And, we're always grateful that you did that, and having that experience has made a big impact, I think, in you being successful as a sales manager, but also, for our company. And, it's something we can advertise too about the knowledge base that we have. But, and to that point, between you and Bruce and Victor and Trisha, we've got a staff that has some serious music ed chops, and I think that might've been something that you pinged on when you came to us for a job, for sure. And I know I strive for that. I know you strive for that. And, it should appear effortless, regardless of what's, going on underneath the surface. We might be paddling like crazy, but if it looks like it's smooth as glass, that's success. That is a huge success and feather in our cap for sure. And I think I can speak for you safely when I say we kind of thrive on that. When we can make it look that effortless, we're like, of course. Meanwhile, we might be pulling our hair out on the other side, but they don't see it, and that's what counts. So that's what we're there for, to do all that frantic paddling so they don't have to. Right, right. And we know that that traveling with a timpani is probably not realistic, and that we want to find quality instruments wherever we go, and that a choir is going to need adequate risers, and how much space are they going to need, and a live accompanist versus a recorded accompaniment, things like that we all know, and also how long it takes to move a group of musicians. It's a choir obviously is going to move a lot faster because they have a lot of less extra equipment to use than a marching band or an orchestra. Carrying a string bass through an amusement park is not easy. So we know that, and we know that we need to prepare for that based on the group that we're performing with or that we have on our tour. I think that makes a big difference to a director. When we are in our beginning phases of exploring a tour, actually asking the right questions, because it also gives those directors a peace of mind that they know that we know what we're talking about and we know what they're going to need. And hopefully we can anticipate those needs, and so that it's never an issue while they're on the tour. I'm really proud of that.
Or doing an updated itinerary, or booking busing. Like, they all did that by themselves, and it was just more work on their plate. So for them to hear that we had take all of that off their plate, it was they were very happy to say that.
It can be a game changer. It really can for a director, and making the director look good is what is what we live for, right? That's what one of the goals. Obviously, I think our primary goal is student safety, to make sure the students have a safe trip and that they are protected at all costs, but another one of our goals is to make that director look good, make it seem that, back to that effortless point, and I think talking about how we absorb a lot of that administrative work for a teacher, the administrative loopholes and hoops that you have to jump through as a teacher, there's a lot that Pete can do to help with that in terms of paperwork and processes. And I'm sure you've had experiences with tour operators and with Peak in particular, and how we were able to help you with that.
Every day. They're drowning in paperwork every day. Parent questions whether or not what to wear for the concert in 3 months from now. Risk management. We at Peak try to absorb all that weight, as well as clean up proposals, have clear timelines, and anticipate questions answered before they're even asked, because of the experience that we've had here at Peak. I say to myself, less mental clutter, happier, more loyal directors. So the more that it's clear to them right away from the get-go, and that we're absorbing a lot of what they usually have done, I feel like it's just
and I think that's another big thing, is having the director. It gives them more time to be that cheerleader and to get the kids excited about the tour, because they're not worried about other things, whether the buses have been booked. They can focus on the kids and the trip, the students and the trip, and that's really what it's about for those directors. And I think part of that also is I know at Peak we try to find the right trip at the right budget for our directors. They need to find the sweet spot of what's going to get them, on the road, and what's going to get parents to be able to participate and families to be able to contribute.
You are. Right. It's so important that if you build that partnership earlier on with the directors, helping them understand and giving them guidelines. If they're they're from Philadelphia and they want to go to Disney for $500, well, that's just not realistic. So by guiding them through trips that can be a great overnight trip for a tier pricing, or playing the long game and playing it down the road of saying, all right, if we're going to do an overnight trip this year, maybe in 2 years we'll do a long weekend, or build up to that Disneyland or Disney World experience, or maybe even traveling to Europe. Just starting small and understanding their families and what they're going through, what they can afford year after year, and then building that your program through travel really helps by understanding your family and your community.
It really does. And it is important I think it's difficult for some directors to be able to explain that value versus cost versus what the families can afford. And finding that sweet spot is really important. And it's something I'm really proud of at Peak, because we really do make that effort to really find what's going to get them the most bang for their buck, what's going to give the families that opportunity and make them feel good about the money they might need to spend for this opportunity, without gouging them, without inflating prices and making it unattainable, and also giving them opportunities for scholarships, that we are aware of, and funding opportunities, whether it's fundraising, whether it's, crowdsourcing, or whether it's scholarships and grants that we're aware of. We always share all of that with our directors, and creating that bond, I think, and you're right, I think that empathy to their situation, understanding that maybe it's a school that's in a very rural area that has, struggled economically, whether it's from the community's standpoint, or a big employer just shut down, or maybe there's an employer coming in and maybe they have, extra money to spend, or that they're comfortable. Understanding the demographics of our clients and the teachers that are trying to develop these programs, and finding that opportunity that's going to fit their budget, I think that's really critical. And also something that I think that we're very good at, and something that we do well to focus on, all without jeopardizing, like you said, the integrity of the tour, and making sure that all of, we're not skimping on security. We're not skimping on bus safety. We're not, because we would never want to jeopardize the safety of the student, but also finding them the best opportunities to fit their budget. I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I think having a tour operator can help a director in terms of building their program further, beyond what they might have expected. And I'm sure you found that when you were teaching, that having that resource was a big deal. Mm-hmm.
It is not, we're not just chasing one trip, one destination to get a sale. We're really helping the directors. We're really helping the directors build traditions, to try to plan multi-year cycles. And by doing that, we'll help grow participation over time. The long-range thinking positions Peak as part of the program's future. It's not the next destination. And we're really trying to understand each program that we are interacted with to help us plan ahead for the future. Not everyone has the single day trip to New York City and then Orlando in 3 years and then rinse and repeat. Some people like to be different, whether it's a trip to Boston and then a trip to Pigeon Forge the following year, mm-hmm. or maybe they want to head out to San Antonio or Austin. We try to just navigate depending on what their community wants, what type of students they have, whether it's building with the English department or the social studies department, and whether they're reading a book or playing a piece that is with history, a lot of rich history with it. We really try to play the long game and just plan so that way it's not year after year, all right, where are we going? Or what are we doing? If you have a 4-year plan, we can really help alleviate that stress for you year after year.
Absolutely. And maybe introduce tours that maybe the director hadn't considered previously. Maybe they never mm-hmm. considered going to New Orleans for the Spring Jazz Festival for their jazz ensembles, or maybe they never considered an opportunity like marching in the New Year's Day parade in London, or, any kind of opportunity that maybe they haven't been aware of previously. I think a lot of directors are familiar with certain, Carnegie Hall locations, big performance venues, big parades, but maybe there's other parades they hadn't considered, or maybe there's other choral festivals that they don't know about that are taking place in a beautiful European countryside. Those are things that we like to be able to introduce too. And if you have that plan to help that director build their program, having it all laid out already, then you're right, they don't have to stress about it. They don't have to think, oh God, now I got to pick another place and I got to think about it. But if we lay it out and have that game plan, and working with us at Peak, we can do that and we can have it. And then we can just kind of, come back the next year and be like, okay, let's get ready, because now it's time for us to start talking about our year 2 plan, which was Nashville. I mean, it doesn't mean we have to stick to it. Maybe we pivot. Maybe there's something different that has come up that's going to be equally beneficial. But I think it's important. But it's also good too, because I think one of the other big things about working with Peak is that we are not like a big box store when it comes to tours. We're not there to just, grind and get them in and get them out and get them in and get them out. There's a personal touch, I think, that we like to do that says a lot. And I think it says a lot when I look at my Facebook feed or my Instagram. I have a lot of contacts that are clients that have become friends. And that says a lot to me. I think it says a lot about Peak. And I'm sure you've seen a lot similarly too. That if you were to ask our clients and talk to our partners and our friends, our director friends, that we do care. We cheer them on regardless of whether it's on a tour with us or whether they've made it, they had a bunch of students make All-State, or, and sometimes it has to do with even situations in their lives that come up that might, preclude them from being the best director they can right now. Maybe they've got some personal things that have come up, whether it's family stuff or, anything that could happen outside of the classroom. I think us being sensitive to that too, and understanding where they're at, meeting them where they are and helping them. Maybe it's like, okay, clearly you're not ready to talk about Orlando next year because you've got something going on in your world. So we can be sensitive to that and take that into consideration as we move forward. And just maybe understanding that and being human, because we're all here doing the same things, trying to get through the next day. But, having that sensitivity makes a big difference. As a former band director, I know that the value of travel with your program, and also with picking a tour operator to help you with that travel. So, what are some of the things that you think are assets for directors? Like, why should they pick a tour company? And even better, why should they pick Peak?
Years from now, down the road, when they're out of college and they're maybe starting a family, they might not remember what they played their junior year at the spring concert. but
Right.
they are just singing in the rain, walking back to their hotel, or getting back on the coach. That's what they're going to remember. Those are the defining experiences that I believe that will last a lifetime.
Excellent. And when you pick a tour operator to do that with, it makes it easier for you as the director, I think, to be involved in those core memories so that you're not off chasing down the bus, but like singing in the rain with your students. That's something that they'll remember, not just from the bonding together, but you as the director, whether it's choir, orchestra, band. I think that's something that's really special. And I know I remember the stuff from, back when the earth was cooling when I was in band. So I think that's a cool idea that, it is something that is important, an important part of travel. And when you hire a tour operator, it gives that director a little more time to be part of them instead of just watching them themselves. So that's really cool. Do you think
Absolutely.
that do you think that teachers think about, their legacy a bit, like in terms of what boundaries they have to work with in their classroom, but how they can go beyond the classroom? Sure.
For making sure a valuable lesson when traveling is just preparing the students for the real world. You don't know what's going to happen. As much as we plan, you have to expect the unexpected. And by using Peak, like we are there, like so that way you don't have to worry about any of that stuff at all. We're
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. And helping students to realize that just because they do something in their choir room or on their auditorium stage, that there's other things beyond the walls of their school for them to take advantage of and to look at and to realize they're not alone. I think it's easy to get isolated or to feel like, you're working in your vacuum at your school, but to see it, on the world stage, so to speak, and beyond the walls of the classroom is a real big gift. And it's really neat that that you did that as a director. But it's one of the things at Peak that we look forward to doing with directors is to help them to, branch out a little bit and, stretch their legs, so to speak, to see what else is out there for their students.
Reputation sticks and often follows you even if you move to districts. So like it's as soon as you walk into your classroom, you're building a person. Yes, through music, but there's so many life learning experiences through music that you can build.
Wow. That's quite a statement. That's a big deal. You're not just, you're not just teaching music, you're building students. I think that's very poignant and very spot on. I think that's great. And what a gift that we get to be able to help those teachers do that through travel. Do you think that travel helps your program in terms of challenging your students or maybe elevating it a bit?
So whether it is students that are in the high school already that's not in the program, that they were on that, there's always a fine line going from middle school to high school of whether or not they want to continue with music. But
Sure.
if you, it retains upperclassmen, I feel like that's huge too. Yes, as much as you want to recruit and build your numbers, you need to make sure that the upperclassmen are feeding into what you believe in your program and making sure that it's their program. It's not the director's program, but by guiding them, it's the students are building their own program. And I think that's really important. And I just think it helps justify funding and support. Programs with travel become known as the group that does big things. And then over time, that your name becomes synonymous with growth and opportunity. So I really think that by bringing travel to programs, it lets students see things in different lenses of music. And I think that's such a valuable tool for when these students are growing and becoming grown men and ladies.
For sure. And I think you hit the nail on the head, with the idea that you're not just a director that is teaching, but you're the director or the teacher that is doing things, doing big things. And that's impactful. It's impactful in the entire community because when you do that, people notice. It's hard to hide a trip to Pasadena. It's hard to hide a trip to Vienna. So,
Absolutely.
having it out there, I think makes a big difference. And knowing that, you're traveling and as a director, hiring a tour operator to do that, hiring Peak to be that partner to help you become that teacher it's a great tool, I think, for any director to have to make sure that they know that, to become that teacher, you don't have to do it alone. There's tools and resources like tour operators to help you do that. And then you look like a rock star. to your
Absolutely.
admins, to your parents, to your community, to your students. Obviously your students are primary, right? But getting them to buy in, I think, is a big deal. I think, and you pointed that out, that, having those upperclassmen buy into the concept makes a big difference. Speaking of which, do you think that, I think it's hard, I think, for families who maybe aren't part of the music world originally. Maybe the parents were involved more in sports or academic competition team or things when they were in school themselves. But now they have a student who's in middle school who is a music kid. And now they're like, this is a new world for me, and you're
Yeah.
going to introduce a trip to Disney. What do you think? How do you think that travel helps with that, or does it? Is it a good tool? And what do you think about those families and helping them learn how to be a band parent?
Parents remember a lot, and especially who made that possible. And that trust turns into advocacy at board meetings, booster support.
That's fantastic. And, again, the director can use, Peak Group Travel to do that. They can use us as a resource, to elevate their and build that trust, and that's something that I think parents look forward to. I mean, I'm sure there would be a lot of parents that might look at a director and be like, yeah, but what do you know about buses, or what do you know about hotels, and what do you know about the parks and things like that, places and destinations and performance opportunities, and we can make the director look like an expert by giving them this fantastic itinerary, and then the director could be like, look at all this great stuff that we have for you to do.
Exactly.
I think that makes a big difference. That's really cool. Do you I know student leadership is critical to any organization, right? Section leaders, captains, drill captains, whatever they're doing, whether it's band or orchestra or choir. And I think that travel gives them an opportunity to exercise those leadership skills. Have you seen that come true in some of your tours?
To be accountable, and to work as a team under pressure. And I feel like that's huge. I feel like that last one is so valuable, because when an alumni later says, the trip taught me how to be responsible, confident, and adaptable, that's not about the destination. That was about your leadership philosophy. And so if you're building that into your program from day one, it's going to transition to anything that you go to, whether it's at a marching band competition, whether it's at a big collegiate choral festival, or whether it's on a trip. It all brings it all together. Again, just at the end of the day, making these students into a better human being.
And what better legacy? As a director, how rewarding that must feel to have that kind of impact on a student, and to get to do it, while you're, walking through the streets of Prague, or whether you're visiting London, or, performing at a cathedral with your choir. Those leaders can see it in action, and I think travel is a great opportunity for them to take on little roles, whether it's helping to unload the luggage from the bus, or helping to coordinate the room keys for a particular group. I think those things are important life skills, but also opportunities for them to stretch those leadership muscles too. And I think, again, when the director has the opportunity to work with his students, their students, to do that, versus worrying about the logistics of the trip, which is what Pete can do, it allows for even better experiences for those students, because the director can focus on that. The teacher can be,
Sure.
And can emphasize that, which is really cool. And I'm happy that you had that experience as a director, but now you get to be on the other side and help directors to see and use these tools to help their programs grow. Super neat. Do you feel like, and what do you think the impact is of hiring a tour operator when it comes to, the sustainability framework for your career as a director?
It's building that repeatable model. You look around the programs that of why they're doing well. Well, I feel like that they have a repeatable model that is a success. And by doing that, if it's broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So by building a repeatable model, whether it is a trip every 4 years, whether it is a senior trip, whether it is a day trip every other year, when the program continues traveling after you, that's the real legacy. You
For
just
sure.
didn't run the trips, you
Yep.
changed.
And what an opportunity, to leave your mark like that on a group. I think that's impactful, for sure. I think that when you get to not just, I think new directors, it's easy to be overwhelmed, that first year when you're just fresh out and you're figuring your own style out, right? I think in college
Mhm.
you learn styles, and you're taught, ways of classroom management and rehearsal techniques, and how to be that classroom leader. But also they might, I think new teachers aren't always thinking that legacy concept, the idea of outside of the classroom or at the end of their career. But I think that, it's important for them to understand what impact they can have even from the very start. So I think that being, you know, you and I have talked about this before, but you mentioned being a program builder, not just a director, and what that can look like. And I think travel helps with that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Right. And doing that through travel is, I think it's almost a no-brainer, because it's something that they can. Is it work? Of course it is. But being enthusiastic and buying into the whole concept of travel with your program and how it can be part of that legacy, and an important part, because I think
Yeah.
that, building your program involves more than just, like you said, rehearsal techniques. They don't retire and in their retirement speech say, I was the best at working measures, 18 to 42 of a piece of
Right.
music. Yeah, that was important, obviously, because that's preparation for a concert or performance. But I think understanding how broad, and not limiting themselves to just what happens in their rehearsal room or on the stage, but what they can do outside of that is super huge. So I think that that's a big deal, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And when you hire Peak, you get to have that, you get to take that part off your plate. You can take the logistics part off your plate, have the concept of the trip that you're looking for, but then using that trip then to build that program. Using Peak as a resource, one of the tools in your toolbox. I'm sure directors all have instrument repair specialists and rental specialists, and and vendors that you go to for uniform designers, and your performance gear provider. Those people are, in all of those industries, obviously are part of it, and so is Peak. And while travel might not be mandatory for a lot of schools, it is a critical tool that they can use from their toolbox. Excellent.